Ladies and gentlemen, Gary Richardson with the Richardson Collective here. I'm so ecstatic and excited to bring you this special cinematic segment of Surveying Fatherhood together. The heart behind this is for you as the viewer to tune into a conversation to spur you on in your endeavor of becoming not only a better person and maximizing yourself, but also in the dynamics of pursuing fatherhood, to incorporate the things you either hear here or have heard in the previous episodes with other fathers, to create a culture and a dynamic of pursuing the maximization of yourself, of your family, of the culture and the world around you, and for the generation to come. So please enjoy, and thank you so much for your support and for tuning in. Ty, Kevin, thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you guys. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And what I always like to do with guests is to just jump right in. And so I'm going to facilitate this a specific way with the questions. I'd like to start with you, Kevin, you being the father of the other guest here this time, just to hear from your perspective. And then we'll shift into Ty, him being the newest father, and the dynamic, and just hearing from both perspectives in that way. So with that then, guys, what does it mean in your perspective and understanding of things and comprehension of things to be a father?
Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to be on here. I appreciate it. Being an educator, I teach fifth grade. I have taught fifth grade for 5 years now. And by doing so, I tend to look at things through a lens of teaching. And so if you would have asked me this question 10 years ago, it would have had probably a negative answer would be given to you because of my past and childhood and some experiences I went through as a child, which we may or may not get into later. But I look at everything through the eyes of a teacher. So to me, fatherhood is a lot like teaching. Like my students in my class, my number one goal for my students is to make sure they're loved and they're cared for. Make sure they have a safe place to come and learn every day, to make sure that they are provided for, just that they know that they have somebody on their side, in their corner, who's there for them. And so I kind of look at fatherhood kind of the same way, teaching, guiding, supporting, and I don't really have a one-word answer for that. It's just kind of all of those things. And I've, looking back through the years, is I failed in many of those areas, I feel like, and I've learned a lot the last couple years. But that's kind of how I view fatherhood, is kind of in the same realm as an educator, as a teacher, somebody who teaches and guides and builds up. So, yeah.
What's your Ty?
I mean, after listening to the podcast and trying to decide when you asked me this question what I was going to say, I think I would just want to agree with what I think I've heard every father say so far is sacrifice. Definitely feel that, but also being so young and so fresh, I feel like I can't really say I've sacrificed that much initially at this point. So I think right now, what it means right now is just being in the moment, because I'm really young and in so many ways I'm still a kid myself, so it's just being in the moment and trying to make every day get the most out of every day, I guess. And being intentional in little moments, because I really am just at the beginning of this, so that's just that's where I'm at right now. So
The word sacrifice, I read a quote the other day from a football coach, actually, and he said, not to exist for yourself is a beautiful thing. And so I kind kind of reminds me of that sacrifice, when you are a father, there's a lot riding on you. There's a lot on your shoulders, and it's easy as a young person, as a young father. I had Ty when I was about the same age as he is now, and so trying to understand and figure out and navigate how not to exist for yourself is a difficult thing, but it's also a beautiful thing as well. So it's a challenge we all face.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I can even speak, my son's only 9 months old. And so I still feel pretty fresh in a lot of ways to this experience as well. And I want to really hone in on this idea that you guys are both presenting, and that's sacrifice. One, because of either it's kind of thrust upon you in the beginning, and you really have no choice but to exemplify sacrifice in a lot of ways. And yet, I love your perspective of trying to seek to make the most of each given moment. Because at the end of the day, that's all we can do with that regard. And for you, Kevin, bringing up the points of building and mentoring and teaching and guiding, while those are things that have been cultivated over time in your perspective, whether that's a shift that's newer or not, it's still a beautiful encapsulation, I think, of what our call to fatherhood provides. And so with this outset, these first initial thoughts, then, if we can pivot to this kind of next thought process when it comes to fatherhood, because I believe that all definitions that we give derive from somewhere. And so with as much as you guys are comfortable with, you more so because your father's right here at the table with us, what was your experience with your father?
That's a tough one for me. A lot of emotions behind that question, and hopefully I'll be able to get through this. So my father committed suicide when I was 5 years old. In our house, he was supposed to go to work one day, ended up not going to work because the weather, went back home. We were not there at the time. I had an older brother who was 8, little sister who was just a couple months old. And us kids and my mom, we went somewhere, we come back, and we find my dad there in the bedroom. He had killed himself. And I still remember that, just like it was yesterday. I remember the sounds. I remember my mom. I remember the scream. I remember the look on her face. I remember her taking me to the neighbors. I remember sitting at the neighbor's house watching the ambulance drive by. Like all those things. So when you say fatherhood, like first experiences, that's my first experience. Like that's what comes to my mind. Not a pleasant thing, by no means. And so growing up as a child, of course, I hated Father's Day. I hated it. Still to this day, it's a tough day for me. Even though that was, 37 years ago. I was telling someone the other day, like, man, it doesn't matter how long it is, like it's still tough, and I don't know what to do. Like I've tried to get over it, like, but you just can't. You can't just get over something like that. And so as a child, and this was back in the 80s, so this was a while back. This was back in 87, and so we didn't go to counselors back then. We didn't have therapists, back then that we went to, and so growing up, I didn't have any of that. Like I just had to deal with it. I just had to process that in my mind as a child, and I didn't know how to do that. Who would? I mean, and it really messed me up mentally and emotionally and psychologically, and I was very good at hiding that. I learned to cope with that in my own way, and cried myself to sleep. I don't know how many nights. And so shortly after that, my mom remarried, was put in a situation and married a wonderful guy. I have a ton of respect for my stepfather. Coming into a situation like that is not easy. I looking back now, I know that, and I see that, and I understand that, and I have a ton of respect for him for stepping in and taking us 3 kids in. He had a daughter of his own, blended family. It was a tough thing, and me and him were never really close. And so I know they'll probably hear this podcast and listen to it, and I don't want like anything I say now to like sound like I'm putting blame on my mom or my stepdad or anybody at all, because my mom is the strongest person I know. I mean, for going through and dealing and managing and coping with that the way that she did. My mom and stepdad took us to church every time the doors were open. My stepfather provided for us. He worked tirelessly to provide for us kids, and he didn't have to do that. He did. I know that he probably did the best that he knew how to do. And I know part of the reason me and him probably not being so close is not as much his fault as it is mine, because growing up, I felt like all I wanted was my dad. And I'd hear people say all the time, like, oh, well, God's got a plan, everything happens for a reason. And I didn't care. Like, if that was God's plan, I didn't want anything to do with it, because all I wanted was my dad, And so I hated those questions. I hated Father's Day, hated everything to do with it. And so I didn't want to let my stepfather kind of take over that role of my dad, because I wanted my dad, if that makes sense. And I was afraid if I let go of that I was letting go of my dad. And as a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 15, 16-year-old kid, I did not know how to process all that. And the death of my dad, like, that's not something we talked about, like, as a family. And it's not something we brought up. It's not something we talked about. I don't know if it's something, like, I'm sure we could have, but it was never like, hey, let's sit down, let's talk about this. What are you feeling? How are you dealing with this? How are you coping with this type of thing? That didn't happen. And it's nobody's fault, but it just didn't happen. So I had no release. I didn't know how to release. I didn't know how to think. I didn't know how to manage all these emotions that I was feeling inside. And so it wasn't really until I was about 30 years old that I finally started to ask questions. And I finally started to kind of start to figure out, like, okay, like, I want to get past this. Like, how do I do this? Like, I've been struggling with this for so long. I've had kids of my own. At this point, Ty is, getting up there in age. He's getting older. And, like, how do I deal with this? Like, I got to move past, because I was just stuck. I was stuck in that moment for so long, and I didn't know how to get out of it. And so I just started asking questions, like questions that I didn't ask when I was a kid, or that nobody else asked me when I was a kid. And so I went and found, like, people that worked for my dad, because my dad owned a construction business. I went and found people that worked for him. Like, hey, what happened? Like, what do you remember? Went and talked to my aunts, went and talked to my uncles, talked to my mom for the first time really ever, and got a lot of questions answered. And that began kind of the healing process for me. And at about that same time, I started going back to college to get my degree in teaching. And there was one specific moment that I remember. I was student teaching, and there was a fourth grade, a little girl. I still can picture her face. There was a fourth grade girl come up to me in the hallway, and she showed me a necklace that she was wearing. And, I bent down. I'm like, oh, that's really pretty. Like, that's cool. Like, what is that? Like, and she opened it up, and she said, it's a little picture of my dad. And I said, oh, that's awesome. She's like, yeah, but he died when I was 5 years old. And for some reason at that moment, like I felt the Holy Spirit just speak to me, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And like in the movies when everything else just kind of blurs and stops, like that's kind of what it was like. Like I could see everybody around, but everything went mute, and I could just see that little girl, and like the Lord spoke to me, and like I could hear it in my voice. He said, "Kevin, this is why. This little girl is why." And it just all made sense. Like from that point forward, I don't know why, but from that moment forward, I'm not okay with what happened with my dad, but I'm at peace. Like I'm not okay with how I grew up, like not knowing how to deal with all that. And I don't know why it took me so long to get through that and to process that and to process those emotions. But at that moment, it finally made sense, and it was just like everything was just lifted off. And to this day, like I have the opportunity to work and to counsel with students every single day who are going through or have been through the exact same thing that I've been through. And every single year I've had students in my class, and on a daily basis, like I can look into their eyes and I can tell them it's not always going to be this hard. It's not always going to be this tough. So just keep going. There's hope. And it sounds weird, and a tragedy that you would say there's hope in that tragedy. But there is. And so fatherhood, those are my first encounters or recollections of fatherhood. A little different now that my kids are older and have kids of their own. But still a tough day. But definitely something that's a work in progress, and I'm still dealing with and still trying to work through on my own. So that was a long answer. Sorry.
No, don't apologize at all. Before we move to you, Ty, with this question, I always like to take a moment to say thank you. Because no matter the experience, whether good, tragic, this is a vulnerable part of most people's lives. And I recognize that by asking this question. And there's a lot of intentionality behind it. And so, from the bottom of my core, thank you for sharing and being willing to share. And I think one of the most beautiful frames that has been given to me recently is that villains take their pain and they use it for evil. And heroes take their pain and they use it for good. And so, no matter the example that's given to us, good or bad, tragic or vibrant, the fact that you're seeking to use even your pain or your lack for others is the exact thing that, out of the core of our understanding of our fathers, is the thing that is going to bring people where we had lack, is going to bring them substance. And so, thank you for being willing to share. And thank you for willing to be so transparent. And thank you for doing good for your community. Because even though I'm not directly involved in the educational system with you, I, as a man and as a father, pray for people like you. Because I think it's so necessary. And it is, unfortunately, in this existence, sometimes the only path to healing is to helping others, even with our pain.
When I don't want, like, it took me a long time and to get through that and to process. I'm still dealing with it. And, like, I have found that the worst, like, the most tragic thing that happened in my life ended up being the thing that has driven me the most to be what I'm supposed to be. And so that's why I actually enjoy opportunities to be able to share my story now. Like, it's difficult. It's still hard. It's still, the scar is still there. Like, it still hurts. But I enjoy those opportunities because if I can help someone else get there quicker than what I did, like then it's worth it. Like that's my goal. That's what I want to try to do. Like not to dwell in that as long as not to get stuck in that moment the way that I did. Like if I can help someone and give them encouragement and give them peace and give them a hope so they're not in that moment as long as what I was, then that's what I want to try to do with my life. Because I found out, like, as the older you get, like, I've finally been okay with, like, my life is not about me. Like, my life is not about my happiness. My life is not about whether I had a dad or didn't have a dad, or what happened to me or didn't happen to me. What my life is about is how can I use my experiences and the things that have happened to me in my life, how can I turn those around and use those things to help other people get to where we all want to go. And so it took me a long time to learn that.
Yeah, and it's going to. I genuinely can't imagine going through something like that. But again, the point being, like, you're still willing to try, right? And you're still willing to get the ball rolling forward. And so, again, thank you so much for sharing that. It truly is a testament to the person that you are, the more I get to know you, because I know there just aren't empty words. And it's a testament to the courage that you have to be willing to share and to be willing to be transparent and honest, because I think a lot of times the misnomer about us as men is we have to hide these things, or we have to shame away what we feel, or through processing tragic and traumatic things that have happened to us. But it is in not only the acceptance of the reality of those things, but the dynamical pursuit of cultivating responsibility despite what has occurred to us. That is going to set the tone for ourselves, our families, our communities, and God willing, our world. And so I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you sharing that. And now for you, Ty.
All right. I mean, off the bat, like, and what you said too about like the hero and villain thing, I think kind of what you're saying at the end is like, it does speak so much, like, to the person like that my dad is. 'Cause like growing up, obviously, I knew, like, I didn't always know what happened, but it was like from as long as I can remember, I just knew like, oh, dad didn't have his real dad like there. And so I feel like there was maybe like moments where I maybe had more grace, in moments where I, not necessarily that he failed, but maybe I felt like he failed. And I think that's just bound to happen. I think that now, like, I can't imagine like being in that position. And so I am very thankful for my relationship with my father, and that he was there, and that he provided for me what he'd never had, you know. And yeah, I don't know, I would be a complete mess like if I grew up without that. And so yeah, my relationship with my dad growing up, I always knew that. And yeah, it was fun. I know, like, growing up, I have lots of memories of playing ball. I mean, that was kind of what we did. And I feel like that's one thing I could say, like, I know my dad was always like intentional about like spending time playing like video games or like ball in the yard. And we would like mow the grass like on the lawnmower, ride the lawnmower with him. Sometimes all of us at the same time. Like, I even have like pictures like weed eating around like the trees with my toy weed eater or whatever. And it's like memories like that, like playing board games and the Wii, and then like getting older, like music and stuff. So I know that like those are things that I think of when I think of my relationship with him growing up. It's like he was there for like the fun. Like I remember that. And I also think on like a different side of that he set an example for me whether he intended to or not, to work hard for the people you love. Because like he mentioned, like he didn't go back to college, or he didn't go to college until he was like, what were you, 32 or 31?
30 or 30. I think I was 32.
Okay.
32 when I went back.
Yeah. So, and was working, obviously. And I mean, at that point we were a family of 5, and then, and we were homeschooled. So for anyone who doesn't know that, like he was the income for the family, but also going to school himself. And, because he had this desire, I think, to just be better than what he was, you know, like, and just to grow in his career. And I think that really like set an example for me to like work hard. So like in a, I guess like a work aspect of that. And then and I definitely think like, yeah, he put in the work when it came to the fun too. And honestly, the reason I got into like music, which was like such a big part of my life, was him and like my uncle, because we would go over there occasionally, and if we weren't playing basketball and on the carport / gravel, like they were playing guitars and singing old songs, you know, on the porch kind of thing. And I wanted to play along, and so that was like the lead into that. And then always like being very encouraging for me to just like, you know, follow my dreams, which I think that's like something every parent tries to do, but it matters. It's not that it's like, oh, everyone does it, you know, like follow your dreams. It really was like, it was encouraging. And I think there was times when I probably sounded way worse than I thought I did, and you know, they pushed me to like, no, like you've got this kind of thing. And yeah, and then I definitely would say, obviously not at the end of it all, but at the end of my little bit, that I definitely see my father as a hero, because yeah, coming out of like what he just shared and providing for my family, financially and spiritually, and like we talk about here all the time, like the ministry of like presence, which is like the extreme opposite of the situation he came from. And so I think that sets up my journey in fatherhood and what it's going to be. I think fairly well. I hope so. But yeah, so I definitely see my dad as a hero. And I know like it's beyond me and my siblings, like because of the work that he's in. And I know he has such a passion that I don't even know how much like we could talk about it, you know, within the time frame of this, but like the passion and the stories he could share about like his kids in his classroom. And he's literally everyone's favorite, for the right reasons. And he's a very, how do I phrase it? He's a needed like example of what a godly man looks like to a lot of kids in, you know, the school who don't even have their dad or either of their parents. Maybe they're with grandparents, you know, that's just the reality. And he provides that to a degree in the classroom. And I think that is so beyond, you know, what most of us can like strive for. Like, I mean, it's such a good position to like to have that impact. And I know he does. So yeah, my dad's a hero.
And I had good men in my life. Like, don't get me wrong. Like my stepdad, like ton of respect for what he did. Like he was a godly man, is a godly man still to this day. Pray, read the word. Like I saw him, I could hear him when he was in the shower, like just he would pray in the shower and you could hear that. And I would have friends over and it was always embarrassing and stuff.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And so like a ton of respect for my stepdad. I had uncles who stepped in. One of my uncles, John, he's passed away a couple years ago, but he was always the one, you know, he'd be working on something and see us playing in the yard and he'd come out and play ball with us. He'd ride four-wheelers with us. He'd go swimming with us. He taught me how to shoot a bow, took me hunting for the first time, like my Uncle John. Like, he was that guy. He was the intentional one. He was present. Like, whenever I think of who was present in my life as a father, it was my Uncle John. And had another uncle, Uncle Mike, who stepped in, super hard worker, just man of character. I mean, one of the just genuinely nicest, godliest men that I've ever known. And so I did have those figures in my life to help guide me and shape me. And I feel like I pulled from those things to try, and I kind of feel like that's how I ended up fathering in some sort of way. Like, I didn't really have the father that had deep conversations with me. I didn't have anybody in my life that had the talk with me or that would guide me through certain hard things as a teenager. Like, I didn't have that. And I know that's one area that I feel like I failed in as a father, are those areas with my kids, because I didn't have that myself. And so I didn't know how to go about it. And I was scared because I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know what to do. And so, but I did have those examples of godly men in my life. So.
No, that's all. It all speaks to the point that Nick drove home to me when we were talking about fatherhood, is that fatherhood isn't merely a position or an identity, but it's a part of the core essence of who you are as a man. And I think that speaks to your given situation with the men surrounding you. You took from them and you gleaned, and in a sense, you surveyed the examples that were before you, and you used that. And for you, Ty, one thing that I'm hearing is this common thread that seems to be the word sacrifice, that in the sacrifice of who your father is as a person and the way that he sought to cultivate a life for you, it really speaks to our call as fathers to cultivate our children to their maximal potential. So in a lot of ways, the man that I know you to be is a direct result of the sacrifice of your father. Yeah. And so I really appreciate you being open and sharing those things as well, because it's just as vibrant, it's just as important to remember and to reflect on those things. And as difficult or as beautiful as this question can be with all of its, experiences and associations, especially with the term of father and fatherhood, I appreciate you again both sharing those things, because it really, again, threads the needle of this theme of sacrifice to our definitions, which derives from our experiences, and now into our given day-to-day walks of life. The question that I want to ask you both, whether hard or not, is how do you think that you succeeded in fatherhood? And how do you think that you failed? Or to phrase it differently, what would you change?
Want me to go first? Well, a couple of the things I just touched on, I feel like I did make an attempt to be present. Looking back, I don't know what I really got right, what I got wrong. I feel in my heart that I did try to be there. Went to the ball games, like played catch in the yard. Like, I wanted to be that for my kids. Wanted to make it a point to just be available to them. And I know an area that I would have, I wish I would have handled differently, and I looking back, is just the communication aspect of it. Again, I didn't have that as a father, and that's not an excuse. I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I wish I would have had all this stuff when I was Ty's age. But a lot of that was left up to my wife, Alisha. I was working. I was going to college. I was doing the fun stuff, and oftentimes she was the one at home dealing with the grind. And that's hard. And she did an amazing job and is doing an amazing job with that, because with that, oftentimes she's at home with them all the time homeschooling, so she's the disciplinarian. She's all of that. And that should have been my place. Like, and that's an area where I still struggle and I still fail with that, because she's the most selfless person. Talk about sacrifice. Like, she is the most selfless person that I know, my wife and Alisha. And so I wish I would have, because there are things that she tried to get me to do with the kids growing up, and say to the kids and do to, like, with the kids, that I didn't, because I was scared. I didn't know what I was doing, type of thing. And I wish I would have, I wish I would have listened to her more.
Join the club, buddy.
Yes, I know. Yes, because she got it right a lot quicker than I did. So just a few areas. So.
And Ty, for your massive stretch of 18 no, I'm just kidding. 2 months. Almost 2 months?
Yeah, almost. So, trying to decide which one I want to start with. Maybe I'd start with the failure. I think right now the failure would probably be, like, and I guess it'd be okay to say, like, within, like, fatherhood has actually been, like, well, obviously with taking care of Asri, but, like, helping. I think there's a lot of aspects I having an issue, like, how to phrase it, just, like, starting, being responsible for, like, the baby. Like, I'm trying, obviously, but it's just, there's so much where, like, I feel like Sariah is, like, natural, and I'm just, like, on the other side of it, like, oh, like, I can do that, but, like, now, like, she's already taken care of this, or
That's the God-given mom instinct.
yeah,
Like,
I guess
us men don't get that until later on in life.
I guess so. That I guess would be, like, the failure so far, is that there are certain areas that I would like to just get better at being, like, maybe taking initiative of just, like, no, I'll do that, like, or going out of my way when it's, like, sometimes I'm just like, well, you show me, like, or and I think that that comes with, like, the sacrifice. It's hard to sacrifice like, my personal time. That's probably what I struggle with most, is just being like, she's holding the baby and he's not crying, and she seems like she's okay, she's not stressed out, or at least that's what I see. And so I'm just like, okay, well, I'll just do my thing, maybe I'll play a video game, or I'll hop on YouTube and binge or something, or we'll watch something together. But it's, like, also, like, looking back, some nights I'm just like, I should have taken him, like, at that moment. And I think those are, like, maybe the little, like, I guess just, like, things I could do better at right now. And I'm sure that list will grow exponentially as we ages. What am I succeeding at? He's alive still, so
that's a plus.
Yeah, 2 months in.
Thank you for that.
Yes. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I feel like at the same time, I'm trying to be fun with him as much as I can, and just be goofy, and, like, that's fun for me. But I'm hoping that's, like, I'm investing in his personality, whether other people will like that or not, when he's just like me. I don't know. I don't know what really I could say about I don't know quite yet.
I think the fact that you're just, like, you're aware, like, you being there is a success. Like, you just being present a lot of times is success in and of itself.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of times when I was a young father, and we would have you and Holden would be little bitty, and we would go off to certain events or family outings, or drive to visit relatives. Like, a lot of times I would leave and go do other things. I'd be playing basketball, I'd be doing other stuff, and Alisha would be stuck with the kids. And so, yeah, there's things like that I definitely, look back on and wish I would have been a little bit better of a help, been more of a man, but just you being aware of trying to be present, like, and recognizing that at a young age, I think that in and of itself is a success.
I'll take that. And yeah, I guess just to play off that, like, I do, I'm enjoying the book, and I think that I guess I could just say, the fact that I'm reading that, like, maybe I'll use that as my, like, that is very eye-opening, and so I think that maybe my success right now would be that I know in my head there are a lot of, like, successes to come, because I feel like I've been set up very well, and I have multiple people around me, not like just my father, but I have you, and then, like, so many of the guys that you have had on the podcast are in my life, and I know that, maybe they're not so in my life, but I could reach out to them and they would totally be there, if I needed. So maybe that's it, is that I'm just in a good place for the future, and that's maybe my success. Not that that's really my success, I guess it's kind of the people around me, but yeah.
I think those things, the point that I'm learning by asking this question is cultivating this reframe of whether in our minds wins or losses. Ty and I have been talking about this, and I've used this quote quite a few times as of late, is this reframe that at the end of the day, there are no losses. There are only learnings. And if we can take that in an optimistic progressional towards a lens of hope, then whether it is networking with other guys or networking with our wives or having the humility and the wherewithal to both say, yes, I'm going to set myself this tone and this standard that I want to be held accountable to, and yet to have the humility to set my pride aside and say, teach me, or how have you learned this? Or to our wives, hey, you're really good at this. I want to learn how to be better as a person and as a man and as a father. And I think it starts there with initiative and just trying the thing, because you can only learn by failing, really. I feel like we learn more from our failures than our successes. And so I just want to encourage you both and myself again in that reframe that it's a progression, and it doesn't matter whether it's been 2 months, 2 weeks, whether it's been 20 years. The point is I can learn from both of you in your own given experience. And I want to have that heart and that mindset with my own son and with my own marriage, so that we can all continuously be cultivating a culture and a dynamic that is only upwards and onwards to something better. And so with those things, then, since we got the hard stuff out of the way, I want to get to a little bit more of a practical side on these questions. And that is, for you guys, what is one key principle of fatherhood specifically that you would pass on to someone else? This is the endemic example I give. You're on the island, people are writing the note and the message in the bottle, you're receiving it, and you are writing your response back to them. What's the one thing, if you could boil it down?
You said practical, like more practical thing? Is that what you said?
Or get into the practical side of these questions where it's more of a day-to-day, like, Kevin, I'm like coming to you saying, hey, like, what's the one thing, if you could give it to me right now, that I could just take with me that's a key principle for fatherhood?
Ooh, that's good. I think we've already touched on it. The one thing that I would say, I think we've already said, is just being present. Like, just be there. Like, you may not know what in the world you're doing. Who cares? Just try. Like you said, you might fail. Learn from it. Like I tell my students all the time, don't waste your mistakes. Like, you're going to make them. Like, I make them every day, all the time. Just don't waste them. And so I would say just be present. Don't get so caught up in you and your goals, your ambitions, the things you want, your desires. Just stop and be present. Be present in every situation, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's easy, whether it feels like it's going easy, whether it feels like things are going tough. Just be present. Just be there.
That's an awesome answer, and I love that you nailed it on that. And not to tangent too much, but just thinking about what you just said to your students as far as not wasting their mistakes. Alex Ramosi has this reframe of paying off your ignorance debt. And that came to my mind, and I think it's so helpful because to the father that we are all aspiring to be in our mind's eye, whatever the ideal version of that is, by our failures and by our mistakes, we are saying, I am willing to continuously progress towards that ideal. And I definitely think it starts with being intentional and being present. So what about you, Ty?
I mean, that's probably what I was going to say. I think if I had to choose something else, I don't know, I guess I could say, like, along with being present, be, like, intentional with, like, letting them know that you love them. Because I think that's something that I don't know, I think that's easy to just, like, brush off, I guess. It's like, bye, I love you, see you later, or, like, you know, little texts and stuff. Like, sometimes we say it and it's just, like, out of habit. Not necessarily that you don't love them, but it's just, you know, it's just, like, loses its value to a degree, although it shouldn't. So I think it's, like, yeah, along with being present, it's, like, letting them know, like, that you actually, like, truly, like, love them. And that you are there. Like, yeah, you're there, but, like, letting them know, like, I'm always here. Because I think that's, yeah, I don't know. I feel like that, like, is it'd be hard. It's hard to pick one thing, like, to just, like, kind of, like, boil it down to. But, because I want, like, my son to always know, like, how much I loved him, and I want him to see, like, how much I love his mom, and because I want him to love well, and I want him to be present for who he chooses to love. Yeah. So, yeah, being present and, like, intentionally, like, not just loving, but letting them know you love. Like, yeah.
I don't know if it's, like, if being intentionally present is a thing or not, but, like, we can be present but not be present.
Yeah.
Like, if you know what I mean. I mean, either on our phones. Nah, that's the easy thing to do. Just anytime there's a down moment, just, you know, and we're present, but we're not really present, you know. And I remember the story in the book, Intentional Father, that about the boy being at his basketball game, and he was, I don't know if you've made it this far or not. The boy being at his spoiler.
It's okay.
The boy being at this basketball game because he was a pretty good ball player, and it was like a championship game or something, and he was having a really good game, and he was on it, like, and you could hear people chanting his name and stuff, and he was into it, and he was excited, and his dad was there at the game, and he just hit this awesome shot and stuff, and he looked up in the crowd to see his dad's reaction, and his dad was, like, reading a book or something. He wasn't even paying attention. So his dad was present there, but he wasn't present. And so being intentionally present, if that's a thing, like,
it is now trademark.
It is now.
Make the t-shirts.
Yeah.
No, that's incredibly powerful as well, because even though it's simple in concept, the difference between looking at my son saying I love you, or my wife and saying I love you, to I'm in love with you.
Yes.
The weight of that, we do need those moments of reframe
Yeah.
for sure, because we all fall into that pitfall.
Yeah. And it breaks the everyday, because you don't stop every day and just be like, Gary, you're one of my best friends. I love you, man. And it'll be at the end of work every day, it's just like, hey dude, love you. See ya. But it's stopping and having that, or looking at my dad, I appreciate you so much. I love you. That just is so different. And it's the same words, but it's just, I guess it's the way you say it.
When it's out of the routine,
yeah,
type of thing.
And no, I think that's, yeah, and our wives, that's such a it's almost like when you buy flowers, because you don't buy flowers every day, but when you buy flowers, even, it's just you'll never not buy flowers for her and her just light up, unless she hates flowers. I don't know. So yeah, it's kind of to that degree, I guess. But
when I commend you guys young fathers, the fact that you are having these discussions at such a young age, I commend both of you for that. It's awesome. It's awesome to see, because when I was your age, this was not what was on my mind. I wish it would have been, because I would have been, I think, such a better father and a better husband. I was just too busy trying to work through my own mess, So I commend you guys for doing this and for having these conversations and for what you're doing with the podcast. It's awesome.
We're trying to build off of the stable foundations that we have. So, thank you. And that's not just a brown-nosing statement or a favorable statement. Truly, for me, I know my father's dynamic, his background, his own experience with his father, and the experience of the father that he was to me. And this is laying the groundwork for hopefully something even better for our sons and for our future children, God willing, on those things. And hopefully for anybody who would watch this, listen, or see this, right? If this can just be the small little seed to plant the flourishment of another generation, another cultural moment, it's worth it. And I know that Ty and I often are able to look at each other and to have that frame of just, we are who we are because of the dynamic of the parents that we had, and we can't shortchange that. And so I think that really gets to the bedrock of why I'm asking you guys the one key principle, is because if we can start with just one thing, then we can worry about the next thing, and it's a perpetual thing that keeps going and going and going. And so thank you to you here, and to you, Dad, who hopefully would be listening to this at some point.
He's not.
Yeah. Who's not here? So transitioning to another aspect of this, since fatherhood is a part of who we are in our essence as men, to use Nick's definition of it, I want to zone in from, instead of just fatherhood, just one token of life advice that you would give to young men, current men, and potentially future fathers. And this can tangent away from fatherhood. It can be ditto to what you just said, or it could be something else to just, a guy going about his regular day saying, I want to improve. So how do I go about doing that as a guy trying to facilitate working that in the modern era?
I will go to, so when I started the healing process, when I started to not necessarily figure it out, but when I began the process of dealing with my emotions from trauma, I learned a few things. And after I read this book, The Intentional Father, the things that I learned were 5 key principles in that book, and I read that and I'm like, wow, that's exactly what I felt. That's exactly what I went through. And I've even said those things out loud. The one thing I would say to a young person, a young father, or anybody really, is life is not about you. if you figure that out, like if you really get a hold of that, because that's easy to say, and it may sound harsh, it may sound hard. It is hard, but it's the total opposite of what culture teaches us today, and in what culture is teaching our kids today. And so it's making it that much more difficult to get that message across and get that point across. But if you can get to the point where you really understand life is not about you, okay, now what are you going to do? Now that it's not about you, like, what are you going to do with that? Like, dig on that question for a while. Like, meditate, reflect on your life isn't about you. This life doesn't revolve around you and your happiness, what you have, what you don't have. Like, I don't mean this in a harsh way, but get over it. Like, because I've said that to myself, like in my situation, like, dude, just get over it. You can't. Like, but whenever you really start to realize, and I don't even know if that's something you can do on your own power. Like, that might be something that just comes from the Holy Spirit just giving you that strength, because I don't know if humanly possible we're able to get that strength ourselves. But just to have the understanding that life isn't about you. Now, what do you want to do?
Definitely father and son. I was about to, like, if I was going to offer to go first, because I immediately thought, like, just begin practicing being selfless. It was like what came to my mind when you were asking the question. Because I think personally that would be something, if I could go back like just a few years even and like throw at me, like just to be like, practice being selfless. Because I think I definitely have like regrets in like the way I left like my family, like getting married, like I wasn't around. Some of it was out of, my love for Sariah, but it was also like I could have handled things better, and I could have made more time to be with my family. And I realize that now, and it like I don't think about it like all the time, but when I do, it's hard because it's like I know I was so selfish, and they still love me, and that's something I would like go back and just be like, practice being more selfless, because that's something I'll never get back, like those last months. And like every time we go over and like visit, it's like I get like a glimpse of that. Not like I'm like, I regret marriage or anything, but it's just like, this is what I left, and I'm realizing now how sweet it was, and how carefree it was, and how much room I had to be selfish, like in that selfish thinking that like I had no responsibilities here, to a degree. So I think like practice being selfless while you're able to be selfish, like, because I think that's just gonna make you happier. It may not feel like you're satisfying yourself, but that's not a bad thing. Yeah, it's like a true happiness, I think, to be selfless, and it's not easy. And I think personally I struggle with being selfless in a lot of areas in my life, especially probably my relationships with everyone. Like I feel like I'm like the most selfish person sometimes, and I know it because I like think back afterwards, like, why did I act that way, or why did I say this, or why didn't I take the time to offer that? Like, that's such a like that would have been such an easy kind of thing to do, and and maybe everyone feels that way. I don't know. But yeah, practice being selfless while you're able to still be very selfish, because I think that's like just what I would tell myself, I guess. But
No, and I think it ultimately goes back to our initial definition of what it means to be a father, even, right? Sacrifice. And I think that in everything we've been talking about really comes down to the moment of what are we going to do in that moment, right? It's that progressional learning, and we have to unfortunately, in a weird kind of paradoxical way, learn our own tendencies and our little things that trigger us and things like that. So as we learn about ourselves, we learn what it means to reframe it to the biblical context of loving your neighbor as yourself. It's natural to love yourself. It's natural to tend to yourself. It's natural to just think upon that because it's your direct area of locus of control. And so how do we propel that nature to even extend beyond ourselves? So as soon as we consider ourselves and, oh, I'm thirsty. It's like, anybody else want a water? Just like small little reframes and micro changes over time, I think are going to volumetrically lead to the propelling of those things in our lives. Yeah. But seeing as this is going to come out potentially on Father's Day, if not around the time frame of, the last question I have for you guys before we close out here is, how would you seek to encourage the fathers to keep setting the tone for their families and their own approach to fatherhood? And this can be, if you guys want to direct your, vantage towards the audience specifically, you can. But this is a moment for you to talk to the audience on, hey, not because it's just Father's Day, not just because we're having this conversation, but I want to give you just encouragement and hope in this process and in this journey of being a more present, better, intentional father.
I'm sure there are going to be people who hear this and listen to this who are going through difficult things right now. We all do. I don't tell my story to get sympathy. I don't tell my story for people to say, oh, poor thing. Like, I truly tell my story because I hope it does bring encouragement to somebody else. And so if I could say one thing to somebody that's out there, it would be something that Winnie the Pooh once said. We're going to go there.
Nice.
You probably know where I'm going.
I do, I think.
So Winnie the Pooh, the great philosopher, once said, in order to get to where you're going, you have to walk away from where you've been. And that has stuck with me ever since I watched that stupid movie. Yes. So in order to get to the places we want to go, eventually you got to walk away from where you were. And that's a hard thing to do because it requires you to do hard things. And so I would just encourage people out there, try to and not be afraid to do hard things. Don't be afraid to practice hard things if it's going to bring about the positive change and the healing that is necessary for you to move forward. Because we all have a story. We all have experiences. Some of them don't seem fair. A lot of them hurt. A lot of them leave us scarred from head to toe. But you know what? There may be somebody else sitting right next to us who has those exact same scars and they're covered up and we can't see them. And they're not going to know and you're not going to know unless you do the hard thing and you reveal your own scars to them so they can see it. And so they can know, oh, they did make it through. There is a way out. His name's Jesus, by the way. There is hope. There is encouragement for me knowing that whatever it is I'm in right now, whatever moment I'm stuck in right now, it's not always going to hurt this much. It doesn't always have to be like this. But to get out of that, you're going to have to do some hard things.
How about you, buddy?
I feel like I was developing something to say, and then you said Winnie the Pooh, and I was like,
totally lost it.
I remember that. Yes. Can I hear the question one more time, actually?
No, you're good. So seeing as it's Father's Day when this releases, how would you seek to encourage the fathers out there to keep setting the tone for their families and their own approach to fatherhood?
Yeah, okay, I remember now what I was going to say. from what I said last time, like practicing being selfless, like, yeah, so it's Father's Day. I guess maybe I would just challenge anyone listening, whether they listen on Father's Day or not, really. But if it is Father's Day and you're listening, don't make the day like about you, maybe. Like, obviously feel celebrated, 'cause that is important, and let your family love you. I don't know, maybe take your family out to dinner or something, and if you're not already doing that, or I don't know, make plans for something that, you know, your family's been talking about, or do something intentionally selfless on Father's Day. I don't know. That's the first thing my mind thought. So that's what I'm just gonna say it. No, I think that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries, man. Gentlemen, friends, I love you guys, and I really appreciate you both. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your intention to pursue this conversation, because hopefully this is an investment to the other people who will be hearing this, no matter how many or how few. Just that I would also want to encourage you both in your trajectories. If there's anything that I can do to help you, please feel free always to ask me questions, call me, text me, the whole thing. And because I know I can receive the same from you both. And so I appreciate you both, and I am looking forward to what is in store for our own personal journeys of fatherhood. And with that, I hope you both enjoy your own prospective Father's Days, and that you would love your families and you would lead them well.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Us.
Yeah. No, I would say, yeah, like, last thing too would be like, thanks for this passion of yours, like, for the podcast, because I think that, I mean, I'm probably your biggest fan. I've listened to every episode. No, I think that it is helping. I mean, I know I have listened to every episode, and every episode I'm like taking away, and it's not just something I'm like doing for entertainment. And I think that I'm not the only person. If I am the only person, then it's me. Like, it's for me, I guess. So it is impacting people. So I would say thank you for having us, and thank you for doing this, and having the people that you have had, and I know the inside, some people that you're going to have, and I'm excited for the lives that it will impact, and maybe that's not even just fathers listening, or maybe it is the fathers, and it's going to impact their kids, and their kids are going to, you know, have kids, and they're going to remember something that their father taught them that he heard someone say on your podcast, you know, like, you don't know. So it's, we appreciate it. Yeah. So
Thank you guys. And yeah, enjoy your evenings.